Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and another day, another Microslop failing. Now this actually has nothing really to do with Windows. I was probably going to laugh and talk about the fact that some people are having issues even booting into their system, but if those people aren't willing to switch to the Penguin, I don't really know what to say. But the big thing about today is Microsoft actually sold you guys out to the FBI. Now, how did they do that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk a little bit about encryption. What do you guys know about encryption, okay? Encryption is the secret sauce that modifies everything in your hard drive, everything in your devices, to make it so that it is basically garbled data for anybody that's trying to peek in, right? Effectively speaking, a lot of modern operating systems, anything that you buy pretty much from the store, comes nowadays with encryption built in. You buy that shiny new Android phone, it's probably encrypted as soon as you start using it. You buy that iPhone, it's probably encrypted as soon as you start using it. But what about your computer, ladies and gentlemen? You buy that new MacBook, it's probably encrypted out of the box. In fact, I think it is. But when it comes to Linux and Windows, the steps that you have to take are a little bit, well, it actually requires you to do something. Now, for Windows users, the way that I can describe it is, you ever heard of something called Bitlocker? Well, this is a Windows virtual machine, and yes, I don't run Windows on my native system. That would be stupid. That is like exposing the worst STD to your body. Do not do this. Always use a condom known as a virtual machine. Now inside here I've got one virtual hard drive, and if you right click on my virtual hard drive, you can see that there's one option called Turn On Bitlocker. Now Bitlocker is Microsoft's hard drive encryption, and typically if you're using a laptop that you take around with you outside, you probably want to have something like this enabled. Simply because when encryption is enabled on a laptop or anything, or even a computer, the moment it's turned off, the access to your data should in theory become pretty fucking impossible. But that is in theory, okay? If you have access and only you have access to the keys required to unlock it. Now, basically, encryption is fucking pointless if another person has access to the master key that they could hand over to the FBI, which is exactly what has actually happened in this situation. So for anybody that doesn't know, Microsoft gave a set of keys to the FBI that was actually part of a, basically the FBI compelled Microsoft to give up information. So for instance, what has happened over here was it involved several people suspected of fraud related to the COVID programs in Guam. Now in this situation, Microsoft had actually been served a warrant, served sort of like an order from the government where they had to give up information to them, which is all fine and dandy. This has been going on for over like 2 decades. It's been going on for a long time. Every company gets this shit, and generally speaking, companies do go out of their way to design their operations in a sense that even if they get served this, they can basically go to the government and say, yeah, we can't do anything, okay? Now remember that Mullvad VPN that I keep talking about? Yeah, well, to give you an idea, these guys were, for instance, raided by authorities. They weren't even just given the order. They had their doors kicked down by Swedish authorities. And when the Swedish authorities searched their actual systems, they were like, brother, we can't get any information because they weren't storing any user information. Basically proving that when it comes to VPNs, I'm pretty sure Mullvad is like the only company that I could ever say, bro, if you get raided by the feds and you don't have anything to give them, that is like the ultimate advertisement for your privacy. Now, in some ways, there are companies like Apple that don't necessarily jump in and give your information up if they don't have to. For instance, back in February 2016, Apple was compelled by the FBI to give a backdoor into iPhones, and Apple basically told the FBI to go fuck themselves. Now, it's pretty ballsy when a company says this, but they basically exactly explained why that was the case. They said that the United States government demanded that Apple take an unprecedented step, and again, they were opposing the order because anytime you ask companies, like, hey, can you put a back door in for us to see, it always gets abused. Not even by the Gestapo, but sometimes by a fucking hacker too. Like a hacker could actually discover a backdoor and use it to infect a bunch of people and steal a lot of information. So of course, when you look down into it, they start talking about the fact that smartphones have become essential parts of our lives. People use them to store an incredible amount of personal information. Things like photos, music, notes, calendars. There is a lot of personal information you will have stored on your mobile devices. That is pretty much a fact in today's modern age. Now, if you look at San Bernardino, back then there was a mass shooting in San Bernardino, and of course it was an act of terrorism that even that Apple obviously says they're not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. They said that the FBI asked us for help in the days following the attack, and we have worked hard to support the government's effort to support this. We have no sympathy for terrorists. So, very normal belief to have. But obviously, look, you can't throw people's privacy out simply because the feds want to look into your shit. So here they basically straight up said that Apple complies with valid subpoenas and search warrants. And they did in the San Bernardino case. But they've also basically said that because of the way they encrypted iPhones and the technology that allows people to be private, they themselves couldn't look into the systems. So basically the FBI was like, all right, fine, fuck it. Make a new operating system that could circumvent the features that you have to secure users, and then install it on an iPhone that was recovered during the investigation. And obviously Apple was like, listen, we can't do that. Okay, that is wrong. And not only is it wrong, but for a company like Apple that now sells privacy pretty much to the user, this would be like the biggest slap in the face. So it's not that companies don't deny this. Companies do fight back against the FBI, and they design their operations in a way where they can't be touched, okay? Now, why didn't Microsoft do the same? Well, it turns out Microsoft, by default, stores the keys required to unlock your hard drive on the fucking cloud. So Microsoft gets like 20 requests a year, and sometimes, if they can, on their servers, if they have your Bitlocker recovery keys, they'll just give that over to the feds. Basically meaning that by default, unless you go through the routes to turn off backing up these keys to their cloud, you're basically encrypting yourself for no reason whatsoever. Because here's the thing, it's not even the FBI that you have to be worried about, okay? What if a hacker broke into Microsoft servers, which they have in the past several times? Imagine if they just grabbed access to this, like a whole treasure trove of this stuff, and started using it against people that were actually compromised. You know, there's a thing about defaults that once you actually look into them, a lot of companies pay big money for things to be default, like default search engines. You know, people don't switch off the defaults. Once something is enabled, once something has been logged into, people very rarely go into the preferences and settings tabs and turn off all of these ticks one by one. Most people don't even know how to do that. Most people don't even go through the effort of doing that, okay? You're talking about people that literally will just want one click to get from point to point to point. You know, honestly, like, forget anything about Windows 11 that's like bugging up on people. Like, that's just funny to laugh at. This is probably one of the biggest advertisements for something like Apple or even Linux for many people too. On Linux, there's something that we call looks, for instance. Now, looks is disk encryption. I don't personally have this enabled on this computer, but on a laptop that I used to use with Linux before I was on Macs, I used to use looks disk encryption, which basically offered the same thing. It was hard drive encryption that I could carry with me. Now, the thing about it is, because this is open source, I'm not necessarily tied to a server or anything like that or backing my shit up. I basically store my keys in my head or personally on me. There is no third key that exists. And therefore, because no third key exists, nobody can hack into the system unless, of course, they put like every quantum computer against the actual encryption algorithm that I used. Again, Microsoft just does shit that like ruins their trust in the worst ways possible, especially for individuals that, you know, even if you're not somebody that is getting checked by the feds, okay? Let's say the feds aren't subpoenaing your account and getting your information. Imagine if a hacker got access to the same information. Microsoft could have unironically got away with this and not given information to the FBI if they had simply just encrypted users' information end-to-end on their servers to begin with. I mean, yeah, sure, the FBI could subpoena for your information and they would just give you a useless encrypted key. And they would have been like, tough shit, can't really do anything about it. Because companies like Apple even provide that same functionality. Like things like advanced data protection, which literally was under threat by actual countries because it provided such a level of security and privacy to the user, because basically whatever you backed up from your phone to the iCloud could actually be protected even further, to the point where Apple says that literally only your trusted devices could actually unlock the information even on their servers. Because that's just how it was protected. Everything was encrypted from end to end, as it should be in modern society. You know what I mean? Now, of course, ultimately, the end, it's not really any company that you can trust. Like, don't sit there and think for a minute that I'm gassing up Apple for no reason. There have been some pretty serious allegations. You know, if you're somebody that uses WhatsApp, and I know people do, WhatsApp is a company. WhatsApp is actually a product from Meta. You know, the guys over at Facebook, and they're the ones that are like, listen, it uses end-to-end encryption, meaning that literally only your information can be unlocked from you and the person you're talking to. So a quick understanding of end-to-end encryption is, imagine if this phone wanted to talk to this phone over WhatsApp. Basically, both phones create a pair of keys, all right, and those keys exist solely on these devices. So when phone A messages phone B and sends it the word hello, basically, that word hello is traveling through the internet, okay? The series of tubes we call the internet. Anybody can pick that data packet out of the internet and go, wow, it's encrypted. I can't really look into it. But if they happen to have the keys that both of these devices have, they could then decrypt that information. So basically, just because information goes from server to server, because it's encrypted on one end and can only be decrypted on the other, it is effectively safe information to transit, okay? That's just par for the course. Now, the reason I'm bringing up Facebook or Meta in this situation is that there's actually a lawsuit that is alleging that they completely lied about this situation. So this actually got filed a few days ago, and I wanted to read this for you guys. Basically, they said that apparently WhatsApp and Meta has access to users' encrypted communications, basically unrestricted. So end-to-end encryption is a method of securing digital communications, just explain that. Basically, what they mentioned over here, in theory, even though encrypted communications may pass through a service provider's servers, on their way to the intended recipient, they remain encrypted and unreadable to everyone but the intended recipient. So in November 2014, shortly after its acquisition by Facebook, WhatsApp partnered with Open Whisper Systems to integrate the Signal protocol, which is an end-to-end encryption cryptographic platform, or protocol, onto its platform. So by April 5th, 2016, WhatsApp has completed the integration into all forms of communications across users' devices. So, really awesome. Now, what they said here is, lest there be any confusion, the Signal protocol does not protect all user information. Only the contents of the communication are encrypted. The metadata associated with the encryption is not. Thus, as even they concede, Meta and WhatsApp have access to users' metadata and can identify the who, when, and where of user communications. Thus, if Alice and Bob message each other 90 times over 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. while Alice is in Seattle and Bob is in Sacramento, all the information is undisputedly available to Meta and WhatsApp. So, however, the contents of those messages are theoretically undiscoverable. So basically, they know people are talking to each other because of the metadata, but they just don't know what's in there. However, they also say that what they claim that they don't have access to the substance of the communications is false, because whistleblowers have apparently come out and said that WhatsApp and Meta store and have unlimited access to encrypted communications, and the process for Meta workers to obtain that access is quite simple. A worker only needs to send a task to a Meta engineer with an explanation that they need access to this for their job. The Meta engineering team will then grant access, often without any scrutiny at all, and the worker's workstation will then have a new window or widget available. So that alone is so bombastic to hear. Like, if that's true, you should not be using WhatsApp whatsoever. Again, this is just a lawsuit, so take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, you know, WhatsApp is going to say, no. Obviously, we're pretty, encrypted, because this is their bread and butter. This is what they sell themselves on. For me, I just choose not to engage with this crap whatsoever. I just use Signal as a messaging app between people who are on iPhones to Androids. And generally, if I'm talking with somebody on an iPhone, I use the end-to-end iMessage system that I would need to. That is as simple as it needs to get. Anything Facebook related is just an absolute no-no by me. Okay, I even feel dirty using VR headsets from them, but you get the idea. Now, obviously, look, Microsoft as a company, I think I don't use Microsoft Windows, I stay far away from this tragedy, but I think it's pretty safe to say that this Bitlocker shit that they did, where they gave your information up to the FBI because people by default stored their keys in the cloud, is abhorrent, it's disgusting, And if you had any faith that Microsoft was going to take care and keep your data safeguarded from anybody, this should be the exact reason you jump away and get out of this nonsense. Because any company willing to give your shit up like this to the FBI or any agency, forget the FBI for instance, okay? Imagine if they were operating in a country with a much more draconian and restrictive government. I know that America's kind of bad right now for some cases, but there's a lot of countries that are substantially worse, all right? Countries where, you know, the communication that you have could land you death sentences, could land you in jail as a political dissident and all that crazy shit. Imagine if Microsoft was compelled by any of those organizations and under law, they were like, hey, here's some keys. So, you know, imagine if they got access to like a journalist system or like any other system. Because ultimately, Microsoft as a company, in order to meet its business interests, will be compelled and will oftentimes give up your information as long as it allows them to keep making money the next day. So if you care about your privacy whatsoever, one thing that we can learn from this is Microsoft can never be trusted, especially for your privacy after this. I'm surprised that there's not many more people talking about how insane this is. This is worse than any Windows update that they have that breaks the system. Because what this fundamentally means is anything that you keep safeguarded is ultimately, as long as you follow these defaults. Again, this wouldn't be an issue if you go into your Bitlocker settings and you just disable the keys from even sending. But at that point, if you're going through all these steps, Linux and Lux is not far away if you care about your privacy and security. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, fuck Microslop, and fuck them for caving into the feds like this. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.